It's reported that 52% of Americans say cash is king, 49% of Americans feel safer holding cash versus other investments, and the highest voted reasons why came out to be market uncertainty, rising interest rates, strength of the US dollar, regional bank failures, cybersecurity concerns, and the housing market, where Gen Z specifically is more worried about regional bank failures and cybersecurity than any other generation. While these concerns are very important to be aware of, if you find out your girlfriend has $77,000 in her checking account, you may want to show her this video. In fact, an experienced bank teller recently noted numerous reasons why you shouldn't even keep more than $3,000 in a checking account. Knowing that, my name is Sully, and while this is not financial advice and you must make your own financial decisions, if you do find value in this video, all I ask is you consider hitting the like and subscribe button for future content like this. With that said, let's first go over inflation being the silent killer. Now, inflation is the increase in the prices of goods and services over time, and when that occurs, you would have a decrease in the purchasing power of your money. All this means is that your cash is slowly losing value over time, and to see how this works, imagine that you have $100,000 sitting in cash today. If you leave it untouched for 10 years and we assume an average inflation rate of 2.5%, the real purchasing power of your $100,000 will decline. And so after 10 years, you would actually need $128,000 just to buy what $100,000 can buy today. So because of having cash sit and not growing at all, it effectively lost the ability to purchase $28,000 worth of goods and services. So to sum it up, because your $100,000 has not grown and the prices in the economy are continuously going up over time, your cash will buy less than what it did when you first saved it. Now I'm going to cover later in the video where you could put your cash instead, but realize if you simply just bought a total stock market index fund and averaged 10% per year, which historically it has proven to do so for long-term investors, your $100,000 without even adding more money into it would end up turning into roughly $260,000, easily outpacing inflation. But aside from that, another example that's really important to understand is when it comes to saving for retirement. If you think you can retire off of $1 million today, you have to calculate how far away a realistic retirement is for you, because if you're 30 right now and you have 30 more years until you retire, to live off of $1 million today, you're actually going to need just over $2 million in your retirement savings in 30 years when you actually retire in the year of 2055. So rather than targeting $1 million with your retirement savings, you need to consider the impact of inflation, because that alone has pushed many older Americans back into unretirement, where nearly a third of retired Americans are thinking about going back to work as the high cost of living eats away at retirement savings. So because inflation has a large impact on cash sitting, this is exactly why you have to understand the opportunity cost of higher returns. To simply visualize this, let's look back at the first scenario of Mr. Monk's girlfriend having $77,000 in a checking account. And to keep things simple, let's just say that that earns no interest at all. Assuming things stay constant, after 10 years, she would still have $77,000 in her checking account. But what actually happened is that inflation is going to be eating away at her value over time, because 10 years later, the purchasing power of her $77,000, after being adjusted for inflation, would then be worth $59,000 in today's dollars instead, which that means that she would have lost roughly 23% of her buying power because she felt the security of having cash in her checking account rather than somewhere else that could have actually earned her money. Because of that, let's compare to this second scenario where she puts $5,000 in her checking account and then say she has $20,000 in savings for short-term goals, which could be much better off in areas like high-yield savings accounts or other fixed income securities like treasury bills or CDs, and let's say over time that averages 4% per year. And the rest of her money, which is equivalent to $52,000, let's just say is invested into a broad US index fund to keep things simple, and let's assume that she has at least some sort of job because she's been able to save up her money very well. All in all, we're just going to assume everything is constant for the 10 years to keep things simple, and that means her higher interest savings would have turned $20,000 into almost $30,000, and then her $52,000 in the stock market, based on the long-term averages, would have turned into nearly $135,000. That means her potential value on her money after 10 years would now be worth nearly $170,000, and if we adjust that for inflation, the real value of her money would be roughly $132,000 instead of $59,000 if she did nothing. That creates a total opportunity cost of over $70,000 more that she could have in her pocket. Not to mention, but because of the power of compound interest, where the longer you are able to invest and get strong returns on your money, the more it will compound over time, and it can make a significant difference. For instance, if you left all your $77,000 in cash for 30 years, inflation would burn its value even more, and your purchasing power would shrink down to just about $37,000 in today's value. But say you took the second scenario of $5,000 in a checking account, $20,000 in short-term securities or any high interest earning abilities that average 4%, and then you invest $52,000 into the stock market, averaging 10% per year. If you do that, your portfolio would have actually grown to nearly $1 million. And even when adjusted for inflation, that means it would be viewed as $467,000 in today's value. This truly shows how holding too much cash can seriously cost you, especially if you don't need it in the long run. And so a lesson I recently came up on from Charles Barkley, who learned a lesson from Julius Erving, who was a great mentor of his, actually brought up the fact that the problem is, it's not the fact that you can't afford that car, it's the fact that $300,000 you spent on that Bentley, if you bought a car for $80,000, you would have had $200,000 more in the bank, and it would have been growing and growing, and in 1, 3 years, 5 years, 20 years, that $200,000 is going to be worth a lot more. All in all, just remember every financial decision has a cost, but if you have a lot of cash sitting and there's no specific reason for it, the opportunity cost from not having that in higher earning investments could really make a huge difference in your finances over time. But an interesting point that this now leads me into is the trap of safety. There's a few key points I want to mention here, and the first is the false sense of security. You see, having cash on hand seems super safe because you know it's right there in case you need it, and that number's not going down. But the problem is that the value is going down due to inflation, so the security should not be comfortable depending on your situation and if you could do more with it. But I say that because what feels like safety today could actually be what's holding you back financially over the next few decades. And that's exactly why there is a known phrase that goes, the longer your money is out of the market, the more compounding you miss. In fact, an article by Charles Schwab shows how, after all, in a typical 12-month period, the market has risen over 75% of the time. Not to mention, but the safety of having cash on hand can actually lead you into fear-based decisions that could significantly impact your overall growth. As you can see, of all the scenarios on when you time your investments in the market, the only one that is significantly lower than the rest is Larry's, who kept waiting for a better opportunity to buy stocks, was had he been investing at a market high. And remember, for cash that you need for short-term goals, having it safely placed in a high-yield savings account or other fixed income securities is much different than having it idle in a checking account that earns no interest. In fact, the bank teller earlier who said to keep it under $3,000 is because she says you have easier access to make spending more likely. She states that she noticed a clear correlation between the size of a customer's checking account balance and the amount of frivolous spending they do. She said to think of it like having a milkshake in front of you 24/7, you're gonna keep taking sips whether you need them or not. But knowing that, let's now go over when holding cash makes sense. For starters, a checking account I believe should only be used for the everyday expenses. This is because most don't offer any interest, and that extra cash sitting just loses value every day to inflation. While this can definitely depend on your situation and what you're comfortable with, most experts suggest keeping 1 to 2 months of expenses in your checking account at all times. So if you have $3,000 in living expenses every month, that means you'd ideally want to consistently keep $3,000 to $6,000 in your checking account. Aside from that, you would then want to ensure that an emergency fund is properly set up. This typically refers to having 3 months of living expenses saved in the case of an absolute emergency. So let's say that your living expenses are $3,000 per month, then you would want to aim for $9,000 to $18,000 saved for an emergency fund. And when I say emergency fund, I'm pretty much referring to any location where you can have your cash safely stored that allows you to earn strong interest and the ability for quick access to your money when needed. There's a few places you can definitely consider for this, but the most common one is a high yield savings account, and I'll have a link in the description below to some of the top ones if you're interested to learn more. But after that, you're then going to have short-term goals that you want to have safely stored, and that could be for things like buying a home or paying for a wedding, and the best places here could also be high yield savings accounts, or depending on the time frame, you may want to consider fixed income securities like treasury bills or CDs. Now, if you have all three of those in place with your savings, any cash after that is really where the opportunity costs really kick in, because if you don't need the cash for any specific short-term purpose, based on the data, you are much better off investing it, assuming you take a strategic approach and have a clear plan. To sum up my entire message here is that the issue is not having cash, but it's the fact of having cash idle serving no financial purpose. And so when it comes to the opportunity cost, let's now talk about where you could put your cash instead. The reason this is so important to understand is because any extra money that you have set aside, you could have it work for you, and as you continuously save and invest over time, the easier things will actually become. Now, the goal I strongly believe in when it comes to investing your money is that you want to maximize your returns, yet minimize the downside risk of losing money. The reason this is so important is because if you go all in and invest your life savings on one stock, you may get a really high return, but you could also lose all of your money. Or you can invest all your money into bonds and get a lower return, but that's at least guaranteed with no downside risk. But the problem is that you still have a huge risk that is the opportunity cost. You see, if you simply invest into a broad index fund that, let's just say, tracks the US stock market, you are now exposed to thousands of companies all within one purchase, and if the US economy as a whole continues to develop over time, which historically it has done so, then your money will continue to grow over time as well along with the market. Think of it like you betting on the entire US economy and everyone that's working to develop the country, rather than a meme stock that you never know what could happen to it. But the thing to understand here is that putting cash into broad index funds is a slow process and there's still volatility with your investment, but depending on how the market does and how often and how much you invest, you may not even notice gains for a few years. But an example I want to refer to here to explain things easily is if you were to buy a total stock market ETF like VTI that has a super low cost of 0.03% of an expense ratio, which is the annual cost it would take to own the fund every year. But the most intriguing point I want to mention is that over the past 10 years, on average, this fund would have grown 14% per year. All that means is that if you had $100,000 invested in VTI 10 years ago and didn't add any more money into it, that after 10 years, you would now have $370,000. Now, there are many other places you could also invest, such as commodities, real estate, crypto, or even starting your own business. But above all, you want to make sure you understand where you are putting your money and why you are doing it. The legendary investor Warren Buffett famously said the most important rule when it comes to investing is to never lose money, and the second rule is to never forget the rule number 1. I recently made a video that I think you'll find great value from that talks about the top 10 rules you need to know about when investing into ETFs, and I'll have that linked in the description below for you. And don't forget, if you want to get started with a new high-yield savings account or learn about other top financial products to consider, I'll have direct links in the description below for you. And I will say, depending on the one you choose, I may earn a commission for it, which is greatly appreciated. End of the day, I want you to do what's best for your finances, and it's exactly why I create all the content I do, and am in the process of building a new startup to helping others improve their financial knowledge. With that said, as always, don't forget to hit the like, subscribe, and notifications button for future content like this.